painters and friends! We are going back to marine generalise and sin, specifically the face painting. In the last video we prepared the face by applying a base skin tone. The base is acrylic paint. Once the base paint is dry, which takes about 10 minutes, I can prepare all paints on the palette. My favorite colors for face painting are the following: yellow ochre, terra rossa, cobalt blue, nature burnt umber, brown madder, titanium white and burnt umber. Primary colors such as yellow, blue and red are for the base skin tone. Other colors, which are umbers or ochres, are for various shadows, tones and coloring of the skin tone. As you probably already know, the base skin tone is always yellow and red. It depends on the specific color, but the beginning is always yellow and red. That's why I started mixing yellow with red. The color mixed in this way can be ready-made skin tone with the addition of white. It all depends on the type of colors. I add blue to my orange shade for two reasons. The color will be a little saturated, meaning its brightness will be muted, and at the same time I add a little cold shade to achieve a more realistic result. By adding white, I already create skin tones, the so-called values. On the other hand, I start adding blue, brown and red to the base shade to get dark shades. I never add black or gray, always blue, brown and red. I always start painting the face with a dark shade. This way I determine where the shadows will be, how deep the expression will be on the face, in which direction the light falls on the face and where the shadows are created. In this case, the face is slightly tilted to the left. The right side, the face and the nose are more illuminated. I must also not forget that he has a helmet that covers most of his head. The eyes are visible, but they are drowned in the shadow cast by the helmet, and then they are the nose and cheeks. The sides of the face, ears and forehead will not be visible at all. All this is hidden in the shadow of the helmet. My work with oil paint is always about the amount I work with. I always apply a small amount of paint, which I then spread over the surface with a flat brush. I have learned to put the exact shade of paint in the exact place. Therefore, the dark color will come to the places that will be darker, hidden in the shadow. These are the brow ridges, the bridge of the nose, under the nose, the cheekbones and from the side of the face. The depth of the shadow is also important. Another depth will be in the nostrils and another under the cheekbones. This stage of painting is about placing the shadow on the face. I use a round brush to apply the paint to the surface and then a flat brush, usually size 2, to spread the paint over the surface. Always a small amount of paint. If there were a large amount of paint on the surface, it would start to smear and I would not have control over the color. It is better to repeat the process with a small amount of paint than to have a large layer on the surface that start to mix with the adjacent paint and the whole thing will be messy and rude. If I want the paint to be more transparent, I dip my brush in thinner and then in paint. This tints the paint, and it is not as contrasting and opaque. I use odorless thinner from AK Interactive, but White Spirit, Sansador or Turpentine will also work. However, these thinners have an odor, and some people may find it bothersome. Unfortunately, those beautiful wrinkles around his eyes Wrinkled forehead and temples on the side of his face will not be visible. The helmet will cover all of that. For now, I am not looking for precise work. I just need to get the paint where it belongs. That is why I do not look back to see if everything is finally spread or if some paint gets in the places where it should not be. I will correct all of that when I apply the skin tone. However, I am still careful with the amount of paint, especially when I paint the fine wrinkles around the eyes and nose. I do not want to make extra work with corrections. As I work, I keep an eye on the overall look of the face and, if necessary, I add more color to the areas that will be more in the shadows. The first part is done. The color is applied to the areas that will be darker. I can start applying the skin tone. However, I can always go back to a certain area and darken it even more if necessary. I start applying the color to the areas that are more illuminated. A small amount of color and spread it with a flat brush. This starts to connect the dark shade with the middle shade and creates a smooth connection between the colors. All paints are great for this. You don't need to do several layers to achieve a smooth connection between two colors. Just like in the previous step, here I try to apply the middle skin tone to the areas where it belongs. Cheekbones, under the eyes, bridge of the nose, etc. I will deal with details such as wrinkles or warm and cool tones later. I need to apply the color and connect it with the color that is already on the face. Still a small amount of color and still working with round and flat brush. On the face that is warmer, I connect the two colors with a redder shade. This is how I prepare the areas on the face that have a warmer tone. I cover the darker areas on the face with this shade. Those areas will still remain darker thanks to the previous underpainting, but they will be skin with the warmer tone. I will also prepare the tip of the nose with the same redder shade. This is also an area on the face where there is a warm tone. I will mix the cold tone by adding blue to the base shade. I will apply this color to areas that should be cooler, such as the bridge of the nose. Unfortunately, it will not be visible at all through the helmet. Another place where I can put a cold tone is under the eyes, the lower eyelids. Some people may develop eye bags or circle under the eyes. They also tend to have a cold tone. Eye fatigue will stand out more, especially if you put a cold tone right next to a warm one. It will create a nature contrast which our face is full of. It will add more authenticity and credibility. When I apply paint a very small area, I don't use a flat brush. A round brush is enough. I apply the paint, clean the brush with my fingers and spread the paint on the area. I apply the paint really small, but enough to create contrast on a small area. I need to make small things visible, like wrinkles, nostrils, or even the tip of the nose. Sometimes it's enough to just paint a thin line with the brush and the wrinkles is done. You don't even need to spread the paint all the way. I really need to create contrast so that the wrinkle is visible, and this is a quick way to achieve that. The wrinkle is visible, but at the same time it's not unnaturally contrasting. Small wrinkles and unevenness of the face can be depicted in the same way. We only take a very small amount of paint on the brush. Actually, we just dirty the brush with the color we want to apply and gently paint or highlight the small wrinkles. We don't press on the brush, we just stroke the places where we want to apply the paint. If we feel that we have applied too much paint, we just clean the brush between our fingers and soften the paint. Working on the forehead and around the bridge of the nose is unnecessary in this case. Everything will be covered by the helmet. I realized this later when we painted the eyebrows and tried to put the helmet on him. Everything disappeared under the helmet. While painting the face, I also prepare the eyes. I usually paint the eyes the next day. That's why I need the whites of the eyes to be dry. I mix the paint for the whites of the eyes from the colors I have on the palette. I add a little brown and blue to the white paint. I need to get a cool gray tone. The brown color will also speed up the drying of the resulting mix, because umbers generally dry quickly. I apply the paint to the eye and use a clean brush to spread the paint to all corners of the eye. Thanks to oil paint, it's very easy. A little paint and spread it with a brush. If necessary, I add color. I put a slightly lighter shade where I'll paint the iris later. I mix the color for the lips again from the colors I have on the palette. I use the skin tone as a base and add a little blue and then a little more red shades that I have on the palette. I lighten all of this with the light shade of the skin tone, definitely not with white. I have to keep the same shade but lighter and desaturated. We don't want a big contrast, which would be created by white added to the skin tone. I start painting the lips with the resulting shade. I focus on the outer edge of the lips, which is always darker. I lighten the color again and then place the color on the inner edge, which is lighter. Once I'm done, I use the skin tone to show the border of the lower lip and make the lip stand out. I added more red to the shade I used for the lips and lightened it again with the light skin tone. This gave me a nice pink color that I applied to the lower eyelid, right next to the whites of the eyes. I also use a light shade to show the lower eyelid, the border between the pink part that is right next to the white of the eye and the bottom part that is just under the eye. This is where the eyelashes grow. I only apply the color at the edge and do not blend it. I also use the same way to show the upper eyelids. It was only later that I realized that the eyes are quite hidden in the shadow of the helmet. I play around with the shades around the eyes a bit, but unfortunately it will not be visible in the end. The helmet really hides it a lot and creates a shadow falling on the eyes. I started to paint the areas on the face that are warmer with the red shade. I used brown mother and started to paint the areas around the nose. I need these areas to be redder and not red. I don't want to cover the skin tone, I just want it to be redder. That's why I use very little color and, if necessary, I dilute the color a little. I paint the cold areas on the face in the same way, very thin blue and a small amount. Again, I just need the skin tone to be bluish, cool. I apply the color to the lower eyelid and then to the bridge of the nose. I also put a little bit of blue in the bird, but really just a little bit and a very diluted color. Now it's time for one step that is not so common. For now, I'm trying to include this step more and more in the face painting. I use green glaze as a sub-optical filter to balance the skin tone. This is a technique used by portrait artists, for example, to create a more nature impression of subcutaneous structure, a cool tone of shadows, or to neutralize too much red. By adding a red tint to the cheeks, I add more life to the face. This color stands out even more when it is right next to the cool shadow where I added the green glaze. I add a different shade of red to the cheeks than the one I put on and around the nose. I would like to achieve a more colorful face, because for me, the face is like a palette of colors. It's not just a skin tone. They are cool and warm tones, reds, blues and greens. It all goes towards a realistic result. The closer I get to the end, the more I focus on the details and keeping the painting in overall balance. I add more warm tones, deeper shadows or more lights, but it's just detail work with a small amount of paint. The face is already painted and now it's just small adjustments. I only work with a round brush and don't spread the paint much. The last steps are about how I feel and what I want the result to be. I control the overall look more and more and only add very light areas on the face. And the face is done. I think it's time to start using green glaze more and more and take the face painting a little further. Thank you for your time and support. See you soon.